Marcus Thompson had always believed that hard work and dedication would eventually pay off. At 28, he'd been with Pinnacle Marketing Solutions for 3 years, steadily climbing from junior account coordinator to senior project manager. The downtown Chicago office buzzed with energy most days, filled with creative minds working on campaigns for major retail clients. Marcus genuinely loved what he did, crafting marketing strategies that helped businesses connect with their customers. His cubicle sat in the middle of the open floor plan, surrounded by coworkers who'd become genuine friends. There was Jessica from graphic design, who always brought homemade cookies on Fridays, and David from analytics, who could make even the driest data sound fascinating. The work environment had always felt collaborative and supportive, which made Marcus grateful to have landed there after a string of toxic jobs elsewhere. Everything changed the day Richard Blackwood walked through the doors. Blackwood arrived as the new Regional Operations Director, a position that had been vacant for months after the previous director retired. The announcement came via company-wide email on a Monday morning, followed by Blackwood himself making rounds to introduce himself to each department. He was a tall, imposing man in his early 50s, with steel grey hair slicked back and an expensive suit that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month. "I'm here to streamline operations and maximize efficiency," Blackwood announced to the marketing team during their first meeting. His voice carried an edge that made everyone shift uncomfortably in their chairs. "I've reviewed the quarterly reports, and frankly, I'm not impressed with the productivity levels I'm seeing." Marcus exchanged glances with Jessica, who raised an eyebrow. The marketing department had just delivered their most successful quarter in company history, landing 3 major new clients and exceeding revenue targets by 15%. "Moving forward, we'll be implementing new protocols to ensure everyone is pulling their weight," Blackwood continued, clicking through a presentation filled with charts and metrics. "I expect to see measurable improvements within the first month, or we'll need to have some difficult conversations about job security." The room fell silent. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he noticed several co-workers looking genuinely worried. These weren't lazy employees, they were dedicated professionals who regularly stayed late to meet deadlines and went above and beyond for their clients. After the meeting, Blackwood lingered as people filed out. His eyes seemed to assess each person as they passed, like a predator sizing up potential prey. When Marcus stood to leave, Blackwood called out to him, "Thompson, isn't it?" Blackwood's tone was neutral, but something about it felt calculating. "I've been reviewing your project files. Interesting approach you took on the Henderson account." Marcus felt a flicker of pride. The Henderson campaign had been one of his biggest successes, generating a 40% increase in sales for the client. "Thank you, sir. We really focused on understanding their target demographic, and I didn't say it was good," Blackwood interrupted, his voice cutting through Marcus's explanation like ice. "I said it was interesting. There's a difference. In the future, I'd recommend sticking to proven methodologies rather than experimenting with unorthodox strategies." Marcus stood there, stunned. The Henderson campaign had won an industry award and had been held up as a model for other teams to follow. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. The results exceeded all expectations, and results can be misleading," Blackwood said dismissively, already turning his attention to his laptop. "Sometimes short-term gains mask underlying inefficiencies. I'll be keeping a close eye on your work going forward." Walking back to his desk, Marcus felt a cold dread settling in his chest. Something about Blackwood's demeanor suggested this wasn't just about work performance. There had been something almost personal in the way he'd dismissed Marcus's achievements, as if he was deliberately trying to undermine his confidence. Jessica appeared at his cubicle within minutes, her face reflecting the same concern Marcus felt. "What was that about?" she whispered, glancing toward Blackwood's office. "I have no idea," Marcus replied, but deep down, he suspected this was just the beginning of something much worse. Over the next few days, Marcus noticed Blackwood's behavior wasn't random. He seemed to have identified certain employees as targets, and Marcus was clearly at the top of that list. During team meetings, Blackwood would scrutinize Marcus's contributions more heavily than others, asking pointed questions designed to make him look unprepared or incompetent. The warning signs were subtle but consistent. When Marcus suggested improvements to their client presentation format, Blackwood would dismiss them without consideration. When Marcus achieved excellent results on projects, Blackwood would find ways to minimize or redirect credit to other team members. It felt like psychological warfare disguised as management. Marcus tried to stay positive, telling himself that Blackwood was probably just trying to establish authority in his new role. But as the first week turned into the second, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Something was very wrong, and Marcus was squarely in Blackwood's crosshairs. The question was, what was he going to do about it? The first real confrontation came during the monthly client review meeting, 2 weeks after Blackwood's arrival. Marcus had spent days preparing a comprehensive presentation for the Meridian retail account, one of their largest clients. The campaign he'd developed was performing exceptionally well, with conversion rates up 32% and customer engagement metrics hitting record highs. The conference room was packed with senior staff, including CEO Patricia Wells, who rarely attended these meetings. Marcus felt confident as he began his presentation, walking through the data that clearly demonstrated the campaign's success. The Meridian executives on the video call were nodding approvingly, and Marcus could see genuine excitement in their faces as he revealed the latest numbers. As you can see, Marcus concluded, we've not only met our initial projections, but exceeded them significantly. The creative approach we took really resonated with their target demographic, and we're seeing strong indicators that this momentum will continue through the holiday season. Applause filled the room, and Patricia Wells smiled broadly. Outstanding work, Marcus. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking that sets us apart from our competitors. That's when Blackwood cleared his throat loudly, causing all heads to turn in his direction. He was studying his tablet with a furrowed brow, as if he'd discovered something troubling. I hate to interrupt the celebration, Blackwood said, his voice cutting through the positive atmosphere like a blade. But I've been analyzing these numbers more carefully, and I'm seeing some concerning patterns. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. I'm sorry, what patterns? Blackwood stood up, moving to the front of the room with the confidence of someone who'd prepared for this moment. While the surface-level metrics look impressive, when you dig deeper into the cost per acquisition data and factor in the client's long-term objectives, the picture becomes less rosy. He clicked through several slides on his tablet, projecting complex charts that Marcus had never seen before. The numbers seemed legitimate, but they were organized in a way that painted the campaign in a completely different light. If you look at these adjusted projections, Blackwood continued, accounting for seasonal variations and market saturation, we're actually seeing diminishing returns that could prove problematic in the coming quarters. Marcus stared at the screen, his mind racing. The data wasn't wrong, but it was being presented in a misleading way. Blackwood had cherry-picked specific metrics and used different calculation methods to make a successful campaign appear questionable. With respect, sir, Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. Those projections are based on assumptions that don't align with the client's actual objectives. The Meridian team specifically asked us to prioritize short-term conversion increases to support their product launch, which is exactly what we delivered. Blackwood's smile was cold and predatory. I understand you're proud of your work, Thompson. But as operations director, I have to look at the bigger picture. Sometimes what appears to be success in the moment can actually indicate fundamental flaws in our approach. The room had gone uncomfortably quiet. Marcus could feel everyone's eyes on him, including the Meridian executives still connected via video. Patricia Wells looked confused, glancing back and forth between Marcus and Blackwood as if trying to understand what was happening. Perhaps, Blackwood continued, this would be a good learning opportunity. Going forward, I'd like to see all major campaign strategies reviewed by my office before implementation. We need to ensure we're not letting enthusiasm override sound business judgment. Marcus felt his face burning with embarrassment and frustration. In front of their biggest client and the company CEO, Blackwood had just publicly questioned his competence and announced he'd be micromanaging all of Marcus's future work. "I appreciate your concern," Marcus said, fighting to maintain his professionalism. "But the metrics speak for themselves. The client is seeing real results, and the client sees what we show them," Blackwood interrupted. "It's our responsibility to ensure we're providing sustainable value, not just impressive-looking numbers that might not hold up under scrutiny." One of the Meridian executives leaned forward on the video screen. "I'm sorry, but I'm a bit confused. We're extremely happy with the results we're seeing. Our sales team has been raving about the quality of leads generated by this campaign." Blackwood nodded smoothly. "Of course, and we're thrilled that you're pleased. I'm simply suggesting that we take a more analytical approach to ensure this success is sustainable long-term. Marcus has done solid work, but there's always room for improvement." The meeting ended with an awkward tension that hadn't been there before. As people filed out, Marcus noticed several co-workers avoiding eye contact, as if they were afraid of being associated with someone who'd just been publicly undermined by the operations director. Patricia Wells paused near Marcus's chair. "Good work on the campaign," she said quietly, but her expression suggested she was concerned about the conflicting assessments she'd just witnessed. After everyone left, Marcus sat alone in the conference room, staring at the blank presentation screen. His hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline. In 15 minutes, Blackwood had managed to turn his biggest professional triumph into a source of doubt and embarrassment. When he finally returned to his desk, Jessica was waiting with a sympathetic expression. "That was brutal," she whispered. "Everyone knows your work is excellent. I don't know what his problem is." Marcus nodded, but something deeper was bothering him. The way Blackwood had handled the situation wasn't just unprofessional, it was calculated. He'd prepared those misleading charts in advance, which meant he'd planned to ambush Marcus during the meeting. This wasn't about performance or business objectives. This was personal. The question was, why had Blackwood targeted him specifically, and what was he planning to do next? Over the following weeks, Blackwood's campaign against Marcus intensified with surgical precision. It started with small changes that seemed reasonable on the surface but created significant obstacles for Marcus's daily work. First came the enhanced oversight protocols. Every project proposal had to be submitted to Blackwood's office 48 hours before any client contact, allegedly to ensure strategic alignment with company objectives. For Marcus, this meant his rapid response times, which clients had always appreciated, became impossible. While competitors were providing quotes and concepts within hours, Marcus found himself trapped in an approval process that stretched simple requests into multi-day delays. "Thompson," Blackwood called from his office doorway one Thursday morning. "I need to see you immediately." Marcus walked into the impeccably organized office, noting how Blackwood had already stamped his personality. On the space, the walls displayed his MBA from Northwestern and various industry awards from his previous positions. Behind his desk hung a framed quote, "Excellence is never an accident. It is always the result of high intention, sincere effort, and intelligent execution. The Hartwell proposal you submitted needs significant revisions," Blackwood said, without looking up from his computer. "The timeline is unrealistic. The budget projections are optimistic to the point of being misleading. And the creative approach lacks focus." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He'd spent 3 days crafting that proposal, drawing on successful strategies from similar campaigns. "Could you be more specific about what needs to be changed?" Blackwood finally looked at him, his expression suggesting he found the question irritating. "The entire strategic foundation needs to be reconsidered. I've scheduled a meeting with the client for next week to discuss a more conservative approach." "You scheduled a meeting with my client?" Marcus couldn't hide his shock. In 3 years at the company, no manager had ever bypassed him to meet directly with his assigned accounts. "Our client," Blackwood corrected coldly. "And yes, Sometimes senior leadership needs to step in to ensure client relationships remain strong. The Hartwell team expressed some concerns about the proposal timeline, so I'm going to present some alternative options. Marcus knew this was a lie. He'd spoken with Janet Hartwell just that morning, and she'd been enthusiastic about the proposal. She'd specifically mentioned how impressed she was with the quick turnaround and innovative approach. "I'd like to be in that meeting," Marcus said carefully. "That won't be necessary. I'll bring you up to speed afterward." Blackwood turned back to his computer, effectively dismissing him. Walking back to his desk, Marcus felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't about client satisfaction or proposal quality. Blackwood was systematically removing him from his own accounts, positioning himself as the primary contact while making Marcus look incompetent or unreliable. The situation escalated further when David from Analytics stopped by Marcus's cubicle that afternoon, looking uncomfortable. "Hey, I need to give you a heads up about something," David said quietly, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "Blackwood called me into his office this morning. He was asking questions about your work habits, your relationship with clients, whether I'd noticed any performance issues." Marcus felt his blood pressure spike. "What did you tell him?" "The truth, that you're one of the most dedicated people here, and your work is consistently excellent." But Marcus, the way he was asking the questions, it felt like he was building a case against you. That evening, Marcus stayed late to catch up on the work that Blackwood's new approval processes had delayed. The office was nearly empty when Jessica appeared at his cubicle with 2 cups of coffee and a concerned expression. "You look exhausted," she said, handing him one of the cups. Marcus accepted the coffee gratefully. "Blackwood's making everything 10 times harder than it needs to be. I'm spending more time on paperwork and approval requests than actual client work." Jessica sat down in the empty chair next to his desk. "It's not just you. He's been asking people questions about several employees, but you're definitely getting the worst of it." Rachel from HR mentioned that he's been reviewing personnel files and asking about documentation requirements. Documentation? Requirements for what? Performance improvement plans? Disciplinary actions? That kind of thing. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Performance improvement plans were typically the first step in building a case for termination. Despite his track record of success, despite his strong client relationships and peer recognition, Blackwood was apparently preparing to fire him. "There's something else," Jessica continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I overheard him on a phone call yesterday. He was talking to someone about cleaning house and removing employees who weren't aligned with his vision for the department." Marcus stared at his computer screen, where the Meridian campaign metrics still showed the exceptional results that Blackwood had somehow twisted into concerns. The injustice of it all was overwhelming. He'd dedicated 3 years of his life to this company, consistently delivered outstanding results, and now he was being targeted by someone who'd been there less than a month. "Why is he doing this?" Marcus asked, more to himself than to Jessica. "I don't know," she replied, "but whatever his reasons, he's clearly decided you're a threat to whatever he's trying to accomplish here." As Jessica left for the evening, Marcus remained at his desk, staring at the evidence of his success surrounding him. Client thank you notes, project awards, positive performance reviews. None of it seemed to matter anymore. Blackwood had the power and the position to rewrite the narrative, and he was systematically building a case that would make Marcus's eventual termination look justified. For the first time since this ordeal began, Marcus felt a spark of something other than confusion and frustration. Sitting alone in the darkened office, he felt anger. Pure, focused anger at the injustice of what was happening. Blackwood might have the upper hand now, but Marcus had something his new manager didn't. 3 years of relationships, institutional knowledge, and a deep understanding of how the company really worked. If Blackwood wanted a fight, Marcus was starting to think it might be time to give him one. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon that Marcus would remember for the rest of his career. He'd just finished a highly successful presentation to the board. about the marketing department's quarterly achievements when Blackwood requested an immediate private meeting. The timing felt ominous, catching him right after a moment of professional triumph, almost as if Blackwood had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Sit down, Thompson," Blackwood said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. His tone was different today, more formal, almost clinical. A manila folder sat prominently in the center of his otherwise pristine desk. "I've been conducting a comprehensive review of your performance over the past month," Blackwood began, opening the folder with deliberate ceremony. "Unfortunately, I've identified several areas of concern that we need to address immediately." Marcus felt his heart hammering as Blackwood pulled out a stack of documents. Each page appeared to be meticulously organized, with highlighted sections and detailed notes in the margins. "First, there's the matter of your client communication protocols," Blackwood continued. "I've documented multiple instances where you've made commitments to clients without proper authorization from management. This creates liability issues and undermines our established approval processes." "Those were standard client interactions," Marcus protested. "I've been handling accounts the same way for 3 years, with full approval from previous management." Blackwood's smile was cold and predatory. Previous management clearly had different standards. "Moving forward, any client commitment that involves resources or timeline commitments must be pre-approved through my office. Your failure to follow this protocol has already caused problems with the Hartwell account." Marcus felt his face flush with anger. "The Hartwell account is performing exceptionally well. Janet Hartwell specifically told me yesterday how pleased she was with our responsiveness." "Interesting," Blackwood said, pulling out another document. "Because I have a very different account of my conversation with Ms. Hartwell. According to my notes, she expressed concerns about your project management approach and questioned whether you fully understood their strategic objectives." Marcus stared at the document in Blackwood's hands, knowing with absolute certainty that it was either a complete fabrication or a gross representation of whatever conversation had actually taken place. Janet Hartwell had been nothing but positive in all their recent interactions. "That's not possible," Marcus said firmly. "I've been working closely with their team, and, are you calling me a liar, Thompson?" Blackwood's voice carried a dangerous edge that made Marcus realize how carefully this moment had been orchestrated. Marcus felt the trap closing around him. If he backed down, he'd be accepting Blackwood's false narrative. If he pushed back, he'd be accused of insubordination and challenging his supervisor's credibility. "I'm saying there might be a misunderstanding," Marcus said carefully. "Perhaps, if we could arrange a 3-way call with Ms. Hartwell to clarify." "That won't be necessary," Blackwood interrupted. "I've already scheduled a meeting with their team next week to address their concerns and reassign the account to someone with more experience handling complex client relationships." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. The Hartwell account was his biggest success story, the campaign that had earned him recognition company-wide. Losing it would be devastating to his portfolio and his reputation within the firm. "You can't reassign my account based on fabricated concerns," Marcus said, his voice rising despite his efforts to stay calm. Blackwood's expression hardened. "I can and I will. In fact, given the pattern of performance issues I've documented, I'm placing you on a formal performance improvement plan, effective immediately." He slid a thick document across the desk. Marcus recognized the format immediately. A PIP was essentially a legal framework for termination, creating a paper trail that would justify firing him within 90 days. "This outlines specific areas where your performance has been deficient," Blackwood continued, "along with measurable objectives you'll need to meet to remain employed with this company. You have 48 hours to review and sign this document." Marcus picked up the PIP with trembling hands. Scanning through pages of accusations and requirements that bore no resemblance to his actual work performance, the document painted him as an incompetent employee who failed to follow basic protocols, struggled with client relationships, and resisted management guidance. "This is all lies," Marcus said, his voice barely controlled. Every single allegation in here is either false or a distortion of normal business interactions. Those are serious accusations. Thompson, Blackwood, replied smoothly. Are you suggesting that I've deliberately falsified documentation? Because that would be a very serious claim to make against a senior manager. Marcus realized he was trapped in a masterfully constructed web. Blackwood had spent weeks building a false narrative, documenting every interaction in a way that supported his predetermined conclusion. Fighting back would only provide more evidence of the insubordination and resistance to feedback already cited in the PIP. I want to speak with Patricia Wells, Marcus said. You're welcome to schedule a meeting with the CEO, Blackwood replied, but I should mention that she's already been briefed on your performance issues. In fact, she specifically asked me to handle this situation with appropriate discretion to avoid disrupting team morale. The implication was clear. Even the CEO was on board with Blackwood's assessment. Marcus was completely isolated, facing accusations he couldn't disprove and a system that seemed designed to ensure his failure. As he walked back to his desk, clutching the PIP document, Marcus felt something inside him break. 3 years of dedication, success, and loyalty had been reduced to a collection of lies and distortions. His coworkers avoided eye contact clearly, aware that something serious had happened but afraid to get involved. Sitting at his cubicle, Marcus stared at the PIP requirements. Impossible metrics, redundant approval processes, and evaluation criteria that seemed designed to ensure failure. Blackwood hadn't just declared war, he'd rigged the battlefield to make defeat inevitable. But, as Marcus read through the document more carefully, something interesting began to emerge. In his eagerness to build an airtight case, Blackwood had made several specific claims about company policies, client interactions, and performance standards. Claims that could potentially be verified or contradicted by documentation. For the first time since this nightmare began, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. Blackwood might have the power and the position, but he'd also just handed Marcus a detailed roadmap of his accusations, and if those accusations were false, which Marcus knew they were, then perhaps there was a way to prove it. Marcus opened his laptop and began taking notes. If Blackwood wanted to play by the rules of corporate warfare, then Marcus was going to learn those rules better than anyone had ever learned them before. The fight was just beginning. That weekend, Marcus transformed his apartment into a war room. His dining table disappeared under stacks of printed emails, project files, client communications, and company policy documents. For 3 straight days, he methodically documented every interaction, every project milestone, and every piece of evidence that contradicted the accusations in Blackwood's performance improvement plan. The more he dug, the more obvious Blackwood's strategy became. His supervisor had systematically twisted normal business interactions into evidence of poor performance, relied on conversations that either never happened or had been grossly misrepresented, and cited company policies that either didn't exist or had been taken completely out of context. Marcus started with the easiest items to verify. The PIP claimed he had consistently failed to meet project deadlines, but his project management software showed a 96% on-time completion rate over the past year. It accused him of poor client satisfaction ratings, but his quarterly client feedback scores were among the highest in the department. More importantly, Marcus discovered something Blackwood apparently didn't know about. The company's comprehensive email archiving system. Every client communication, every internal message, every meeting invitation was stored and searchable. And those archives told a very different story than the one Blackwood had constructed. The alleged client complaints that formed the backbone of the PIP simply didn't exist. In fact, Marcus found numerous emails praising his work, including a message from Janet Hartwell just 2 days ago, expressing enthusiasm about the campaign results and gratitude for his exceptional attention to detail and responsiveness. Monday morning, Marcus walked into the office with a new sense of purpose. Instead of the defeated resignation Blackwood probably expected, Marcus carried himself with quiet confidence. He had a plan, and for the first time in weeks, he felt like he was taking control of the situation, His first stop was the Human Resources Department. Rachel Martinez, the HR generalist who'd been with the company for 8 years, greeted him with a sympathetic smile. "Marcus, I heard about the PIP," she said quietly. "I have to say, it came as a surprise to a lot of us. Your performance reviews have always been stellar." "That's actually why I'm here," Marcus replied. "I'd like to request copies of all my performance documentation for the past 3 years, including client feedback forms and project completion records." Rachel's expression shifted to one of professional caution. "That's certainly your right as an employee. May I ask what you're planning to do with the information? I want to understand the basis for the performance concerns that have been raised," Marcus said carefully. "I believe there may be some misunderstandings that can be cleared up with proper documentation." Within an hour, Rachel had provided him with a comprehensive file that painted a picture completely at odds with Blackwood's accusations. 3 years of exceeds expectations ratings, glowing client testimonials, and peer recognition awards. If anything, the documentation suggested that Marcus was one of the department's top performers. Next, Marcus scheduled a meeting with Tom Bradley, the IT administrator who managed the company's digital infrastructure. Tom was a straight shooter who'd always been helpful when Marcus needed technical support for client presentations. "I need to understand our email archiving policies," Marcus explained. "Specifically, how long messages are retained and whether employees can request access to their own communication records." Tom leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with curiosity. "Officially, we keep everything for 7 years for legal compliance. Employees can request their own communications, but it requires a formal request and approval from management. What if the request is related to a performance review or disciplinary action?" "Different rules," Tom said, lowering his voice. "In cases involving potential wrongful termination claims, employees have broader access rights. Are you expecting this to go in that direction?" Marcus considered his words carefully. "I'm hoping it doesn't come to that, but I want to understand my options." That afternoon, Marcus submitted a formal request for access to his email communications with clients over the past 6 months. He also requested copies of all documented client feedback and project completion metrics for the same period. Real breakthrough came when Marcus remembered something David from Analytics had mentioned weeks earlier. During one of their casual conversations, David had complained about Blackwood requesting detailed performance data on multiple employees, including reports that seemed unusual for a new manager to need. Marcus found David in the break room that evening, staying late to finish a quarterly report. "I wanted to follow up on something you mentioned a few weeks ago," Marcus said, sitting down across from him. "About Blackwood requesting performance data. Do you remember what specifically he was looking for?" David glanced around nervously before responding. He wanted historical data going back 6 months on project completion rates, client satisfaction scores, and billable hour reports for about 8 different people. The weird thing was, he asked me to format it in a way that would highlight negative trends. Highlight negative trends? How? He wanted me to focus on any months where performance dipped below average, any client feedback that was less than perfect, any projects that ran even slightly over deadline. When I mentioned that the overall trends were positive for everyone he was asking about, he said he was only interested in problem areas. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "Did he ask you to create reports that would make good employees look bad?" "Not exactly," David said carefully, "but he definitely wasn't interested in the full picture." It felt like he was shopping for ammunition rather than trying to understand actual performance. "Would you be willing to provide me with the complete, unfiltered data for my own performance?" David hesitated. "I could do that, but if Blackwood found out?" "He's trying to fire me based on false information," Marcus said bluntly. "I have a right to see the real numbers." That evening, David emailed Marcus a comprehensive report that told the complete story of his performance over the past year. The data was overwhelmingly positive, showing consistent excellence across every meaningful metric. More importantly, it revealed how Blackwood had cherry-picked isolated incidents and presented them out of context, to create a false narrative of poor performance. By Wednesday, Marcus had assembled a portfolio of evidence that systematically dismantled every major accusation in the PIP. He had client emails contradicting claims of dissatisfaction, project data disproving allegations of missed deadlines, and performance metrics that directly contradicted assertions of declining quality. But Marcus realized that simply proving Blackwood wrong wouldn't be enough. He needed to understand why he'd been targeted and whether other employees were facing similar treatment. More importantly, he needed to document everything in a way that would protect him legally if the situation continued to escalate. Thursday morning, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He scheduled a meeting with Patricia Wells, the CEO, and formally requested a review of his PIP under the company's dispute resolution policy. It was time to go on the offensive. The meeting with CEO Patricia Wells was scheduled for the following Tuesday, giving Marcus a full week to prepare his case. He spent that time doing something Blackwood apparently hadn't expected. He reached out directly to his clients. Under the guise of his regular quarterly check-ins, Marcus contacted every client he'd worked with over the past 6 months. The conversations were revealing in ways that went far beyond what he'd hoped to accomplish. "Honestly, Marcus," said Janet Hartwell during their phone call, "I was surprised when that Blackwood fellow contacted me last week. He seemed to be fishing for complaints about your work, which was odd because we've been thrilled with everything you've delivered." Marcus felt his heart racing. What exactly did he say? He mentioned that your company was conducting performance reviews and wanted to ensure client satisfaction. When I told him how pleased we were, he seemed disappointed. He kept asking if there were any areas where your communication could be improved, or if we'd experienced any delays. It felt like he was trying to get me to say something negative. Similar conversations with 3 other clients revealed the same pattern. Blackwood had contacted them all, clearly hoping to generate complaints that would support his PIP allegations. Instead, he'd inadvertently created a trail of witnesses who could testify to his inappropriate behavior. Marcus documented each conversation carefully, including dates, times, and detailed notes about what each client had reported. By Monday evening, he had assembled what amounted to evidence of ethical violations that went far beyond mere performance management. The meeting with Patricia Wells took place in her corner office at 9 a.m. sharp. Marcus arrived with a leather portfolio containing 43 pages of documentation, organized into clear sections that methodically dismantled Blackwood's case. "I appreciate you taking the time to meet with me," Marcus began. "I believe there are some serious misunderstandings about my performance that need to be addressed." Patricia listened intently as Marcus walked through his evidence. He started with the performance metrics that directly contradicted the PIP allegations, then moved to the client testimonials that proved the opposite of what Blackwood had claimed. "This is quite comprehensive," Patricia said, reviewing the client feedback forms. "These ratings are exceptional across the board." "That's what confused me about the PIP," Marcus replied. "I couldn't understand how my performance could be characterized so negatively when the objective data tells a completely different story." Then Marcus played his strongest card. "There's something else that concerns me," he said, pulling out his notes from the client conversations. "Several clients have reported that Mr. Blackwood contacted them directly, apparently seeking negative feedback about my work." Patricia's expression shifted from confusion to concern. "He contacted your clients without your knowledge?" "Yes, and according to the clients, he seemed disappointed when they provided positive feedback." Janet Hartwell specifically mentioned that it felt like he was fishing for complaints. Marcus could see Patricia processing the implications. Direct client contact without the account manager's knowledge was a serious breach of protocol. Soliciting negative feedback was potentially grounds for disciplinary action. "I want to be clear," Marcus continued. "I'm not asking for Mr. Blackwood to be disciplined. I'm simply asking for a fair and objective review of my actual performance, based on verifiable data rather than unsubstantiated allegations." Patricia was quiet for several minutes, reviewing the documentation. Finally, she looked up with an expression that suggested she was seeing the situation in a new light. "Marcus, I'm going to need some time to review all of this thoroughly. In the meantime, I'm suspending the PIP pending further investigation. I'll also be speaking with Mr. Blackwood about these client contact issues." As Marcus left the meeting, he felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. He'd successfully challenged Blackwood's narrative, but he knew this was far from over. If anything, he'd just escalated the conflict to a level where one of them would likely have to leave the company. That afternoon, Marcus noticed a flurry of activity around Blackwood's office. Several senior managers were seen entering and leaving, and Blackwood himself looked increasingly agitated throughout the day. Word spread quickly through the office that something significant was happening, though no one knew exactly what. By Thursday, the first cracks in Blackwood's position became visible. Rachel from HR approached Marcus discreetly during lunch. "I probably shouldn't be telling you this," she said quietly, "but Patricia has asked me to conduct a comprehensive review of all personnel actions taken since Mr. Blackwood arrived. She's also requested documentation of his communication with clients and vendors." "Does that mean other people are involved?" "Let's just say you're not the only employee whose situation is being reviewed," Rachel replied cryptically. That evening, Jessica stopped by Marcus's desk with an update that confirmed his suspicions. "David told me something interesting," she said, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Apparently Blackwood has been building PIPs for at least 3 other people in different departments, all top performers, all using similar accusations about client satisfaction and deadline issues." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "He's targeting multiple people." "It gets worse," Jessica continued. "Someone in accounting mentioned that Blackwood has been asking questions about severance packages and replacement hiring costs. It's like he's planning to clean house." The picture was becoming clearer. This wasn't about performance management, or even personal vendetta against Marcus specifically. Blackwood appeared to be systematically targeting the company's most successful employees, possibly to replace them with people of his own choosing, or to cut costs by eliminating higher-paid staff. Friday morning brought the news Marcus had been hoping for. Patricia Wells sent out a company-wide email announcing that she would be conducting a comprehensive review of recent personnel decisions and management practices. While the email didn't mention Blackwood by name, everyone understood the implications. More importantly, Marcus received a personal call from Patricia's assistant, scheduling a follow-up meeting for Monday morning. The message was brief but significant. "Ms. Wells would like to discuss your findings in more detail and explore potential next steps." For the first time in weeks, Marcus allowed himself to feel cautiously optimistic. He'd successfully challenged Blackwood's false narrative and exposed what appeared to be a pattern of unethical behavior. The company's leadership was taking the situation seriously, and other targeted employees were likely to benefit from his decision to fight back. But Marcus also knew that Blackwood wouldn't go down without a fight. Monday's meeting would likely determine whether justice would prevail or whether Blackwood would find a way to turn the situation to his advantage. The weekend felt like the calm before a storm, and Marcus spent it preparing for what could be the final battle in a war he'd never wanted to fight. Monday morning arrived with an electric tension that seemed to permeate the entire office. Marcus noticed hushed conversations stopping abruptly when he passed, and several co-workers gave him encouraging nods that suggested word of his challenge to Blackwood had spread throughout the company. At 9 a.m. sharp, Marcus found himself back in Patricia Wells' corner office, but this time he wasn't alone. Rachel from HR sat at the conference table with a thick folder of documents, and beside her was James Morrison, the company's general counsel, whose presence suggested this had moved beyond a simple personnel dispute. "Marcus," Patricia began, "I want to thank you for bringing these concerns to my attention. Over the past week, we've conducted a thorough investigation into the allegations in your PIP and the management practices that led to its creation." She gestured to Rachel, who opened her folder and pulled out several documents. "What we discovered was deeply troubling. Mr. Blackwood appears to have engaged in a systematic pattern of targeting high-performing employees with fabricated performance issues. Marcus felt his heart pounding as Rachel continued. We found evidence that he contacted clients seeking negative feedback, misrepresented company policies in disciplinary documents, and falsified performance metrics to support predetermined conclusions about employee terminations. James Morrison leaned forward, his expression serious. From a legal standpoint, Mr. Blackwood's actions potentially expose the company to wrongful termination lawsuits, defamation claims, and violations of our client confidentiality agreements. How many other people were affected? Marcus asked. 5 employees across 3 departments, Patricia replied. All high performers, all targeted with similar tactics. Your decision to document everything and challenge the PIP provided us with the evidence we needed to uncover the full scope of the problem. Rachel pulled out another document. We also discovered that Mr. Blackwood had been in communication with a staffing agency about hiring replacements for the targeted employees. It appears he was planning to fire experienced staff and replace them with less expensive contractors. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. Blackwood hadn't been targeting him for personal reasons. He'd been systematically planning to gut the company's most valuable talent to cut costs. Probably to make himself look good to upper management by reducing payroll expenses. Where is Blackwood now? Marcus asked. Patricia's expression hardened. As of this morning, Mr. Blackwood is no longer employed by this company. We terminated his employment effective immediately for cause, including falsification of company documents, harassment of employees, and violation of client confidentiality protocols. The relief Marcus felt was overwhelming, but Patricia wasn't finished. We're also taking steps to repair the damage he caused, she continued. All PIPs issued under his authority are being rescinded immediately. The employees he targeted will receive formal apologies and compensation for the stress and potential career damage they experienced. James Morrison added, we're also implementing new oversight procedures to ensure this type of abuse of power never happens again. Any future disciplinary actions will require approval from both HR and senior management, with mandatory documentation reviews. What about the clients he contacted? Marcus asked, thinking about the potential damage to those relationships. We've already reached out to explain that Mr. Blackwood was conducting unauthorized contact in violation of company policy. Patricia replied. Fortunately, most clients saw through his fishing expedition and reported the interactions as inappropriate. If anything, it strengthened their confidence in our other staff members. Rachel smiled at Marcus. In fact, Janet Hartwell specifically requested that you remain as her primary contact. She was quite impressed with how you handled the situation and wanted to ensure you knew how much she valued your professionalism. As the meeting concluded, Patricia stood and extended her hand to Marcus. I want to personally apologize for what you endured over the past month. Your courage in challenging these false accusations not only saved your own career but protected several other innocent employees. I also want you to know, she continued, that your handling of this situation has been noted by the entire executive team. We're promoting you to Senior Account Director, effective immediately, with a 20% salary increase and expanded responsibilities. Marcus felt tears threatening as the full impact of the vindication hit him. Not only had he been cleared of all false accusations, but his willingness to fight back had been rewarded with the promotion he'd been working toward for years. Walking back to his desk, Marcus was greeted by spontaneous applause from his co-workers. Jessica rushed over with a huge smile, followed by David and several others who'd supported him throughout the ordeal. I heard Blackwood got escorted out by security this morning, Jessica said with obvious satisfaction. Someone said he tried to take files with him, but they confiscated everything. David nodded enthusiastically. The best part is, all his performance documentation has been flagged as fraudulent. Anyone he targeted is getting a clean slate and formal apologies. As Marcus settled into his cubicle, soon to be upgraded to an actual office, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. A month ago, he'd been a target of systematic abuse by someone who'd seen him as an obstacle to a cost-cutting scheme. Today, he was being recognized as a leader who'd protected not just himself, but his entire team. The victory felt complete, but more importantly, it felt earned. Marcus had learned that sometimes fighting back against injustice wasn't just about protecting yourself, it was about protecting everyone who couldn't fight for themselves. 3 months later, Marcus sat in his new corner office, reviewing quarterly reports that showed the marketing department's continued success under fair and competent leadership. The space was bright and welcoming, with windows overlooking the Chicago skyline and walls decorated with genuine client appreciation awards and team achievement certificates. The interim period following Blackwood's termination had been handled smoothly by Patricia Wells herself, who'd stepped in to provide direct oversight until a proper replacement could be found. The new regional operations director, Linda Harrison, had arrived 2 weeks ago with a collaborative management style that was the complete opposite of Blackwood's toxic approach. Marcus's promotion to senior account director had opened doors he'd only dreamed about. He now managed a team of 6 account coordinators and oversaw relationships with the company's largest clients. The Hartwell account had expanded significantly, with Janet Hartwell specifically requesting that Marcus handle their upcoming national campaign launch. More importantly, the 5 employees who'd been targeted by Blackwood had all thrived in the months following his departure. 2 had received promotions, 1 had been selected for the company's leadership development program, and all had seen their confidence and job satisfaction return to previous levels. Jessica knocked on his office door with her usual cheerful smile, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a folder of design mock-ups for their latest project. The Henderson team loved the revised campaign concepts, she reported, settling into one of the comfortable chairs Marcus had added to create a welcoming meeting space. They've already approved the budget increase for the expanded social media component. Marcus smiled, remembering how Blackwood had tried to undermine the original Henderson campaign that had become one of their biggest success stories. It's amazing how much easier client-terror relationships are when you're not constantly second-guessing yourself or waiting for someone to sabotage your work. Speaking of which, Jessica said, pulling out her phone, I got a LinkedIn message yesterday that I thought you'd find interesting. She showed Marcus a message from someone named Robert Chen, who identified himself as a former colleague of Blackwood's from his previous company. I saw that Richard Blackwood is no longer with your organization. The message read, I hope your company discovered his practices before too much damage was done. He pulled similar tactics at our firm, targeting top performers and creating false documentation to justify terminations. We should have warned your HR department when he left here, but we were frankly relieved to see him go. Marcus shook his head in amazement. So this wasn't his first time pulling this scheme? Apparently not, Jessica replied. I did some research, and he's left 3 companies in the past 7 years, all under mysterious circumstances involving reorganization or strategic realignment. I think our company was just his latest target. The revelation was both satisfying and disturbing. It confirmed that Marcus and his colleagues had been victims of a practiced predator. But it also suggested that Blackwood had successfully destroyed careers at other companies before being stopped. At Pinnacle Marketing, David appeared in the doorway, knocking gently on the frame. Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to share some good news. The annual Employees Satisfaction Survey results just came out, and our department scored highest in the company for management, effectiveness, and workplace culture. Marcus felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The contrast with where they'd been just 3 months ago was remarkable. Under Blackwood's brief reign, morale had plummeted, and several people had been actively looking for other jobs. Now, the department was not only performing at peak levels, but had become a model for the rest of the company. That evening, Marcus stayed late to finish preparing for a presentation to the board about expanding their client services offering. As he worked, he reflected on the lessons he'd learned from the ordeal with Blackwood. The most important realization was that toxic leadership could be challenged successfully. But it required courage, documentation, and persistence. If he'd simply accepted the false accusations and allowed himself to be terminated, Blackwood would have continued his destructive pattern with other employees. Marcus had also learnt the value of allies and relationships. The support he'd received from Jessica, David, and others had been crucial, not just emotionally, but practically. Their willingness to provide information and testimony had helped build the case that ultimately brought Blackwood down. Perhaps most significantly, Marcus understood now that standing up to abuse wasn't just about personal survival. It was about protecting the workplace culture and the livelihoods of colleagues who might not have the resources or confidence to fight back themselves. His phone buzzed with a text message from Patricia Wells. "Excellent work on the Morrison account presentation. The board was impressed with your strategic thinking and leadership. Looking forward to discussing your ideas for the new client acquisition initiative." Marcus smiled as he packed up his laptop and prepared to head home. The past few months had taught him that talent and integrity could triumph over manipulation and abuse. But only when good people were willing to stand up and fight for what was right. As he turned off his office lights and looked out at the Chicago skyline, Marcus felt a profound sense of satisfaction. He'd not only survived a coordinated attack on his career, but had emerged stronger, wiser, and more successful than ever before. The best revenge, he'd learned, wasn't getting even, it was building something better and ensuring that future employees would never have to endure what he'd experienced. Justice had been served, but more importantly, the workplace had been made safer for everyone who would come after him. That legacy felt like the greatest victory of all. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.